From the Tamil Heritage Trust, a very warm welcome to all of you who have joined us today for the December 2025 edition of our monthly talk series. Heritage conservation is often thought of as a dialogue between the past and the present, where history, heritage, and cultures converge. The role of science and engineering, which is so important in execution, as well as dealing with the challenges involved in the structural conservation of living structures, is not always recognized or appreciated sufficiently. It was a few years ago that some of us from Tamil Heritage Trust had visited this temple at Thukkachi during one of our site seminars. The scene that we had witnessed inside the sanctum remains etched in most of our minds even now. The roof was cracked, the walls were leaning, it was leaking everywhere. It was almost as though years of neglect and silence had been etched into every stone there. The locals had lost all hope. They were sure that the temple was going to collapse, and it didn't look like there was any help in the offing. This is also the first time when we realized that heritage is not just monuments. It is actually people. Their shared memories, aspirations, and identity, and their collective emotional burden, which is actually carried by these monuments. At that point of time, who would have imagined that this very same 11th century Sri Abathsahayeswarar Temple of Thukkachi is going to be back to life in 2025, bustling with devotees. What started off as a pilot project by IIT Madras and the National Center for Safety of Heritage Structures in 2020 went on to restore this temple completely, get the Kumbhabhishekam performed, and return the temple not only to the locals back, but also people from far and wide who've been visiting it ever since. We have, in 2024, it's a happy occurrence that this project also went on to win the UNESCO Asia Pacific Award of Distinction for Conservation. We have with us today Dr. Arun Menon, a structural engineering expert from IIT Madras, who was the technical head for this restoration project. He will be taking us in detail, step by step, through the process involved, and he'll also be highlighting the fact that this was a classic case of teamwork between history, heritage, and tradition on one side, science, engineering, and technology on the other. Dr. Arun will also be briefly touching upon another project that this team is working on currently now. It is structural completion of an incomplete Rajagopuram at Thiruvellarai. Through both these projects, Dr. Menon will make us understand that science and engineering, with a little bit of sensitizing to history and art, can help us create a bridge between the past and the present, whereby our heritage can be preserved for the future. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Menon. Before we move on to the main program, I'd like to give you a brief introduction about Tamil Heritage Trust, which is our organization. Tamil Heritage Trust, or Tamil Paramparya Arakattalai, is a voluntary organization started almost 15 years back by a group of like-minded people with the explicit objective of understanding, appreciating, disseminating, and celebrating information related to India's rich history and heritage, not just for the benefit of the scholarly and academic minded, but the average enthusiastic public as well. Towards this end, THT conducts programs throughout the year. Chief amongst these are our talks and seminars. Our flagship event is, of course, the monthly Heritage Talks, and we are extremely proud to say that this has been conducted virtually uninterrupted for 15 years now, on the first Saturday of every month. We have merely changed the format from in-person to online through and post-corona. Indology Festival is another event of ours, which is an annual online event that happens in the month of June. Across 6 days, 12 scholars come together on a platform to give their scholarly perspective to various aspects of a topic. Another event of ours, which is just coming up in 2 weeks, is the Pechu Kacheri. This is an in-person event meant to collaborate and coincide with the Margari Isai Kacheris of Chennai. Across 2 days, in our own Tamil Virtual Academy at Koturpuram, Chennai, we will be having 2 dance dramas, 8 talks, and 2 conversations. We have a bevy of well-known speakers like Dushyant Sridhar, Sudha Sheshiyan, Madhusudan Kalaichelvan, Shankar Narayanan, Nellai Chokkar, and a few not so well-known public speakers but scholars in their own right, like N.S. Ranganathan, Mapi Srinivasan, Rajini Arjun Shankar, T.S. Krishnan, etc. We hope all of you will mark your calendar and attend this event in person. And for all those who can't make it in person, live streaming will of course be available. Apart from our talks and seminars, at THT, we also conduct one-day workshops called How Sam or How to See a Museum, How Sat, How to See a Temple, etc. These are conducted in 2 sessions. In the forenoon, we have a series of lectures, and in the afternoon, participants are taken for a practical site visit where we elucidate what was discussed earlier. On and off, we also conduct classroom sessions on a variety of topics like Pallavam Grantham script, ancient Indian astronomy, ancient Indian mathematics, etc. Alamar Avai, an initiative of ours, targets the school teachers of Tamil Nadu, where over a series of weekend lectures, aspects of history and heritage are discussed. The idea being that these teachers will take it back to their students, thus further spreading awareness. Docent training is another initiative of ours, and we have just completed version 3 of the same. Here, a training is given to prepare docents who can present historical sites and heritage monuments in a professional manner to an enthusiastic audience. Site Seminar, another initiative of ours, is a largely in-house activity meant for our own self-education and self-enhancement. We zero in upon a particular site anywhere in India. Our volunteers study the same over several weeks. We have a number of in-house seminars, and then armed with all this knowledge, we visit these sites for a comprehensive experience. Apart from this, THT has also instituted 2 awards for individual contributions. The first such award is called Professor S. Swaminathan Heritage Award and is given for individual contributions in the field of history and heritage. Ms. Falak Chaudhary, an independent historian from Mumbai, was the winner in 2025. The other award that we give is called the V. Venkaya Epigraphy Award and is given for individual contributions in the field of Indian epigraphy. Named after V. Venkaya, who was the first official Indian epigraphist, this award has been instituted by Sunita Madhavan, his great-granddaughter. THT has been entrusted with the responsibility of administering this award. Senior epigraphist Professor Srinivas V. Padigar was the winner of this award in 2025. We have a YouTube channel where you will find links to all our past talks, including today's talk. Kindly subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to receive notifications of our future events. We have a website. These are our social media handles. This is our mailing address. You can mail us here to join our mailing list or associate with any of our events in a voluntary capacity. As I already mentioned, we are a voluntary organization. We do not have any dedicated financial backing. So any kind of contributions are welcome. You may use this QR code or ID to donate generously, and the same will be appreciated. Moving on to today's talk. As I already mentioned, Dr. Arun Menon will be highlighting the role of engineering and science in preserving the rich and living cultural heritage of Tamil Nadu through two projects executed recently. The first is the restoration of the 11th century Sri Abathsahayeswarar Temple at Thukkachi, a structure that stood in ruins for more than 60 years. Through the combined efforts of IIT Madras and the National Center for Safety of Heritage Structures and the HR and CE department, this temple was restored. And it went on to earn the UNESCO Asia Pacific Award of Distinction, a recognition not just of conservation, but of collaboration, innovation, and sensitivity to living heritage. The second project involves the scientific completion of a historically incomplete 7-tier Rajagopuram at the Sri Pundarikaksha Perumal Temple at Thiruvellarai. This project represents an extraordinary blend of structural engineering, architectural understanding, and respect for tradition. Together, these efforts illustrate how modern engineering and interdisciplinary research can safeguard centuries-old cultural expressions, ensuring their continuity for future generations. A little bit about the speaker. He's a professor of structural engineering at IIT Madras with a degree in architecture and a PhD in earthquake engineering from the University of Pavia, Italy. Dr. Menon's research interests are in the structural aspects and earthquake behavior of historical constructions. Currently coordinating the activities of NCSHS, which is a Government of India supported research center at IIT Madras, Dr. Menon is also an expert member on the International Coordinating Committee of several World Heritage Sites like Bagan in Myanmar and Laos. Within India too, he has been involved in conservation projects like Rashtrapati Bhavan, IIM Ahmedabad, Madurai Meenakshi Temple, Konark Sun Temple, etc. He is also active in national and international technical code committees such as the Bureau of Indian Standards, International Union of Laboratories and Experts in Construction Materials, and is an ICOMOS consultant, which is an advisory body of UNESCO. Without further ado, I request Dr. Menon to take over the screen and deliver his lecture.
Very good evening to everybody who's joined in to listen to this very interesting experience that we've had with the restoration of the Thukkachi Amman Temple near Kumbakonam. At the outset, I would like to thank Tamil Heritage Trust for this invite and to share our experience with this unique example of restoration of an ancient temple in Tamil Nadu. Incidentally, it's exactly 1 year since this project received a recognition, which was really not our intent at all. The consecration of the project of the temple was in September 2023, and a few months, almost 6 months after the completion of the consecration of this temple, which was not in its best condition for over 6 decades, the team really felt that this must be well documented, and that inspired us to make a submission to the UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards. And we never expected that this would even be recognized, because it is known to be highly competitive today. But we were very pleasantly surprised to see the kind of discussion that ensued at UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards, and the citation, which was a very interesting reflection of what we attempted to do at this site, which I would read at close to the end of the presentation. So this is a project which involved a large number of people, a lot of energy from different quarters, highly interdisciplinary, and with the active participation of the government authorities in taking the project forward. So let me just move forward and take you through how I've organized my presentation. The context is really the living temples of Tamil Nadu, and that's a wealth of a state like ours, and the context of restoration, but with an interdisciplinary approach, which is extremely essential given the multiple stakeholders in such an environment. IIT Madras and our center here, the National Center for Safety of Heritage Structures, has had this very unique opportunity in understanding the challenges in living historical temples and participating, working with multiple stakeholders in coming up with solutions that can ensure the restoration of these extremely ancient and valuable sites. The three examples that come to my mind as the most prominent opportunities we've had to engage with the subject are the Meenakshi Sundareshwar Temple in Madurai and the fire damage, the fire damage of the Veera Vasantarayar Mandapam in 2018. And so the assessment of the damage and development of a restoration strategy of this marvelous construction from the 1500s was one such project. And today the project is on its way towards a complete restoration. The second project is what I'm going to be talking about, which is a pilot restoration project. It's a pilot project, and you will see why this is considered as a pilot project in the context that we are talking about of the 12th century temple in Kumbakonam. And the third, which I'm not going to be speaking extensively about, but I remember about 7 years ago, THT had organized a talk where the persons closely involved with the project had come together to give a talk, which is the completion of this incomplete Rajagopuram in Sri Pundarikaksha Perumal Temple in Thiruvellarai. So the basic context that we're talking about is spaces that have heritage value. And here it really refers to a comparative importance of different attributes. You're talking of historical, archaeological, architectural, artistic, cultural, and literary considerations which make up this heritage value. But these are associated to the tangible elements of heritage. The tangible elements, the structure itself, the chariots, the vehicles for processional deities, the sculptures, the paintings, the inscriptions, all these make up the tangible elements and draw from all these attributes that I've talked about earlier. But there are intangible elements as well. The knowledge systems, the Agama and the Shilpa Shastras that have gone into the construction of these structures, the rituals and the scriptures that go into creating such spaces, the mythology, the sacred beliefs, and the performing arts. So it's really about all these together, the tangible and the intangible, that needs to be considered as we move forward in the restoration of a living temple, which a place like Tamil Nadu is full of. Now, it's important to see where this particular project, the genesis of this project, and therefore I touch upon the governmental framework within which governance of such structures happens in post-independence India. But if you look at the history of this sort of a regulatory system, the administration of temples was actually brought into the Government Act as early as 1817 and 1863, and then the Madras Hindu Religious Endowments Act of 1926 actually then developed the Hindu Religious Endowments Board. That's 1926. Post-independence, we had the HRNC Act and amendments in 1951 and amendments of 1959. A separate department was created in 1960, and the regulatory framework actually tries to ensure that the historicity of these sites are maintained. In fact, if you look at the rules under the TNHRNC Act of 1959, very explicitly states that work which is civil work should exclude Gopuram, Vimanam, or any stone mandapam or other stone structures with stucco work which belongs to it, which means you cannot consider normal civil work, the historical constructions, as being part of the normal civil work. So this is a very interesting line that comes under the rules of the TNHRNC Act. And it requires that such historical constructions, so the Gopuram, the Vimanam, the stone mandapa, or other stone structures with stucco work, lime stucco work is what is being referred to, is entrusted to Sthapatis as approved by the government. So this document early on makes the distinction civil work from historical constructions, and brings in requirements that the government must ensure is carried out. And then this Act of 1959 also states that it has to enable the involvement of Archaeological Survey of India in the repair and renovation of such structures to bring in the archaeological perspective. So we're talking of early years of the country, where this actually very clearly spells out that a different approach is required, and that it is important that people trained in designing and constructing and maintenance of such structures are brought in for their upkeep. Now, coming to 2020s, the HRNC policy note today has several interesting aspects, interesting ideas that have been incorporated. It again, it's a policy note, and therefore it needs to be backed with technical documents such as a conservation manual to be able to ensure that at the field level, the right things are carried out. The 2020-21-22 policy note actually talks about conservation, renovation, restoration works in temples of heritage value need to be carried out without changing the unique heritage value. And that's where the preparation of a conservation manual has been thought about. And HRNC requires that experts in archaeology, conservation, heritage conservation, and restoration take up scientifically appropriate interventions and works. And that the proposals for Tirupani in these constructions have to be formulated through this interdisciplinary approach and placed before screening committees constituted by the government, so that due diligence has been done before these are executed at the site. It also has created a mechanism where temples that have been identified to be more than 100 years of existence are examined by an expert committee. We're talking of a very large number of temples, and most of you who have engaged with these marvelous sites in Tamil Nadu know that these numbers are mind-boggling. We have about 44,301 temples under the jurisdiction of HRNC. And the HRNC has an engineering, renovation, and conservation wing. In the last few years, they have been enhanced. These wings have been enlarged, and we have a larger number of people, actually trained people, who are actually working in these departments. There are engineers and drafting officers who examine who scrutinize the estimates for the Tirupani renovation works, and are meant to be carrying out supervision, recording, and checking measurements, and so on. This renovation and conservation wing has multiple positions. You have different cadres of engineers, and including civil, electrical, and other engineers, and also has a cadre of sthapatis, both as a chief sthapati and at the regional level in each of the districts, and a number of assistant sthapatis. For a long time, engineers have been on deputation from the Public Works Department within the state government and the Highways Department, both wings of the government that are taking care of buildings, bridges and roads. And this is plainly because the department originally did not conceive that an in-house engineering wing is extremely crucial for continuity of such conservation works of historical temples. But today, we are moving towards a situation where a cadre of engineers, a cadre of sthapatis are being formalized. Now, the fact remains that when you have people on deputation, you don't give them time to understand the context and then carry out the civil works and the renovation works in the temples, which are most compatible with the historicity of these constructions. And before they really learn what is the right approach, they go back to their parent department, and then a fresh person comes, and then we are back to square one. So this was clearly identified as a gap in the way the execution is being carried out within a temple department, within a department such as the HRNC, and that has really mooted the development of the cadre. Now, if you look at what's happened because of several years of this sort of a situation, there have been several examples, and many of you would have seen these in multiple situations. Several examples of inappropriate and unregulated civil works in historical temples, things like sandblasting to clean the stone, to make the stone surface look fresh and new, leading to loss of bas relief and inscriptions. Today, you have a government order that says blasting with sand is prohibited in any of these stone constructions. Stone masonry construction being pointed, that is joints being pointed with stone with cement mortar, is again prohibited. You have to use softer mortars, which are basically which are made out of lime mortar. Several situations where you need water supply, and then you need a water tank. You might need an overhead water tank, and the overhead water tank actually is really right there in the panorama of this historical structure, creating a visual barrier, creating a visual noise in the entire composition. And then you have new elements that are added, repairs to roofs, which are using modern materials. Not that the modern materials may not be effective and the modern materials may not be appropriate, just that these modern materials, in terms of palette of the visual qualities, do not gel well with the historical context and could be a problem. So examples like the addition of PVC roofs over clear stories can be aspects that have actually disturbed the historical setting. There are several other examples where valuable paintings have actually been damaged because attention has not been paid to conserving them in the right manner, conserving these mural paintings in the right manner. Use of bright colors, use of mismatched designs have all added to this loss of historical features within these important living temples. Several examples like these can be seen across the state. We're talking of those sheer numbers, they're in thousands, and upkeep of these temples is what is at the forefront of everyone's intent. But because of the lack of a coherent approach, can lead to informed and coherent approach can lead to literally loss of the heritage. So this in 2015 actually ended up at the Madras High Court. In fact, there was a large case that was initiated. It was writ petition 574 in the Madras High Court, and it was completely relating to the protection of historical monuments and places of archaeological importance, particularly the living temples of Tamil Nadu. And the court, in its wisdom, introduced a blanket ban of restoration works in all temples, which was, given the number of temples and the continuance of religious activity in these temples, a serious problem. And due to several temples representing the case to the High Court, the High Court took some interim decisions. One was to set up an interdisciplinary committee and examine before the announcement of the final verdict, to be able to look at an interim solution for works that are extremely urgent due to structural damage in temples or due to imminent ceremonies which have to be conducted in these temples. So this expert committee, interdisciplinary, was run by the member secretary from HRNC, but had on board the Sthapati, Agama scholars, an archaeologist, a conservation expert, and an engineer. And this also triggered a UNESCO fact-finding mission to look at really what is happening in these temples, what is the quantum of loss that we are talking about. And eventually, when almost 6 years later, verdict came out, it was a landmark verdict. It was a verdict that came with an appreciation of the steps taken by the HRNC department to create, to change the way these temples were being restored, handled, managed, and protected, but also came up with several suggestions. And there were about 75 suggestions in this project, and it was in June 2021 that the verdict was announced. The writ petition was disposed, and commissions were created. State level expert committee was meant to be formally put in place, which was to examine and accord sanction for the repairs and renovations of the temples. The field manual was something extremely important. So steps towards the field manual had to be taken, and basically strengthening of the infrastructure that is taking care of preservation of these structures, and along with the continuance of faith within HRNC was required by the verdict. So with that context, I think it is important for us to understand where the challenge lies and how a very concerted approach is required for us to be able to, one, do due diligence and do justice. So for all of you, it's quite easy to understand if you've engaged with temples in Tamil Nadu, historical temples in Tamil Nadu, that these are ancient temples and these are living monuments. And it's part of a continuing legacy, right, that maintains the original function of the site, which is worship. And now, apart from the worship, apart from the religious activity, it is an inseparable part. You have an inseparable part of cultural and spiritual activities which have developed, which have evolved over the centuries. And therefore, in very plain words, the classical approach to conserving archaeological sites and monuments may not always work in a living temple, even if these are ancient temples. Why? Where is the conflict coming from? The archaeological interest, if one way to examine the archaeological interest in the temple, it lies in the conservation of the physical fabric. Intent is to protect the architectural heritage as an object of archaeological evidence. That's what the archaeological aim is. On the other hand, you have the religious and the cultural interest in the temples. And here, the temple is catering to the spiritual dimension of the people who are directly involved with the temple. And the temple itself, the prime purpose of the temple is witness of the faith for which they were built. But these are really diametrically opposing requirements. One requires amenities, upkeep of the infrastructure, and an infrastructure that is stretched at several times in a year because of the number of devotees and pilgrims that may be coming. On the other hand, you want to keep things as they are because it's an object of historical evidence. Therefore, it's a multi-stakeholder environment. There are too many stakeholders within this context. We need a middle path. We can't completely go one way or the other. We need a middle path, and this needs to be evolved, addressing both the cultural sentiments, the religious sentiments, and the archaeological requirements of such sites. So if one starts examining this subject, one realizes that we are probably looking at it from a modern perspective. But if you step back a little, you'll realize that conservation and protecting temple structures, these ancient structures, is not something new that has been happening in our country. In fact, many of you may be knowing that the principles of Jeernodharma, renovation of existing structures, and in this case, renovation of temples, have actually been spelled out very clearly in ancient texts. And if one were to read these, go a little deeper, one understands that it is not recommending a complete reconstruction, a replacement, just because these have to cater to modern requirements or more and more people coming to the places for worship. In fact, the principle of minimalistic approach or minimalistic intervention, which is internationally considered to be the founding principle of modern conservation, is not so modern after all. Even the principles in these ancient texts actually talk of a minimalistic approach for repairs and renovations. The traditional understanding is the temple renovation is an ongoing process. You have to keep embracing change for continuity of spiritual development. The modern discipline of built heritage conservation, it tries to preserve the ancient physical fabric from loss and depletion through a minimal intervention. And for archaeological monuments, we talk of authenticity of the materials, authenticity of the form, authenticity of features. So the principles of authenticity and historicity of the original material actually takes precedence. You cannot do anything to anything that is original because authenticity and historicity have to be preserved. But in this case, a conscious application of the concept of minimal intervention on the physical fabric, while encouraging the continuance of the witness of faith in a living temple, is really the challenge that we have to address very explicitly. So, what should be the basic tenet in terms of approach to conservation and management? Because it's not only about the lime and the brick and lime and the civil works, but it's also about management of the built heritage in these living temples. We already said that it's really a multi-stakeholder environment that we're talking about. We need to be able to, through modern engineering and architecture, also be able to embrace rules and practices that were set forth by traditional knowledge systems. In this particular case, we're talking about the Agama Shastras, the Sthapatya Veda, and the Shilpa Shastras, or the sculptures. In the traditional system, the role of the Acharya, the teacher, and the Sthapati, who's the builder, in the whole process of construction or be it renovation, is indispensable. But today, you have these the lineages of the Acharyas and the Sthapatis who are still available in the renovation and in the construction of temples. But you also have engineers, architects who are actually and archaeologists who are actually trained in the modern way of education. So a confluence of good practices from modern conservation engineering, if you want, and traditional practices that form the intangible cultural heritage, the knowledge systems, becomes important. And therefore, some non-negotiable aspects are basically that temples should not be repaired. It is not a repair of a civil structure that we are talking about. It should not be repaired or reconstructed, but conserved, which is leaning more towards preserving as much as possible. So conserve them as much as possible instead of trying to repair them and trying to reconstruct them. And another important aspect that we really need to undertake for this vast stock of living ancient heritage, cultural heritage in our state, is listing and grading exercise so that the intrinsic value identified in each of these temples is recorded and not lost because the people who are engaging with these structures are not aware of it. And therefore, recording this becomes extremely important. We need to bring in a consultative process. As I said, there are multiple persons who are stakeholders in this exercise. You also need an interdisciplinary approach from different expertises, and therefore consultative processes are extremely important. Agama and Shilpa Shastras, you need experts from the Agamic and the Shilpa Shastras. You need traditional Sthapatis to be involved. You need archaeologists. You need conservation experts. You need architects, civil and structural engineers, other engineers, temple administrators, devotees, local community, and donors to be able to come together and engage in a conversation as to how these structures must be conserved. There's an ever-growing demand from the public and the temple administration to increase the infrastructure at all these sites because of increased footfall of pilgrims and increased activity as such. So you need to upgrade pilgrim infrastructure. But when you upgrade pilgrim infrastructure and you have a larger number of people coming to these sites, we need to ensure the safety of the pilgrims. It's crowding. And then you need systems in place, and you need technology to help you with the crowding in such places. So finally, development on one side and archaeological evidence on the other side. There's a conflict on what is acceptable intervention in these precincts, and these must be addressed. And therefore, large projects must actually work with the development of a master plan for the ancient temple precinct with an aim to conserve the historic fabric, and as much as possible, also adopt a sustainable and environmentally conscious approach in working with increased pilgrim infrastructure in and around the temple itself. In the process, there must also be an effort to preserve the intangible heritage, which is the traditional knowledge systems. And these have evolved and have been preserved through the artisans who were involved in designing and building these masterpieces and maintaining their functioning to the day. And present day engineers and architects and archaeologists trained in the modern education system must learn how to work with these traditional knowledge systems and proponents of these traditional knowledge systems. So that brings me to this fantastic project that we were fortunate to be involved in, which is Arulmigu Soundaryanayagi Ambigai Udanurai Sri Abathsahayeswarar Temple in Thukkachi village near Kumbakonam. Now, in 2017, when this case was being heard by the High Court of Madras, it was strongly felt that a case example which is not too extensive, which has many of these problems that we are talking about in preserving these temples, be picked up, be treated as a pilot exercise, and engage in a multidisciplinary stakeholder environment to conserve and to use it as an educational tool for all participants involved. So this temple has actually been in disrepair for a very long time. In fact, villagers of Thukkachi have mentioned that this temple is, the way this temple is in ruins is what they remember even from their childhood. So we are easily talking about 60 to 70 years that this temple has been in disrepair. The picture that you see here on the left is the way the structure was in 2020. And most youngsters, most people, even middle-aged people living in this place only remember this. The image of the temple was really the ruins. But the worship in a part of the temple continued till efforts were then made to take up the temple for restoration, and this was possibly in 2012 or so, but never was completed, was also abandoned midway. And in 2017, when in the middle of this proceedings of this interim expert group helping the court was taken up, we were able to see the condition in which such a valuable place of worship, but also a piece of archaeology and history was lying in. And it called for an immediate action by the department, and the judicial proceedings and the work that the expert committee was doing provided an opportunity to pick this up as a didactic exercise for everybody that was involved, including the HRNC. So this was a very interesting place where we could really look at convergences of the traditional knowledge and modern engineering and modern conservation principles, and a lot of synergy both these streams have systems in place, and many of these systems are overlapping systems. You start from documentation, diagnosis, safety assessment, bringing in engineering methods, method statements before you execute. It was possible to see that these streams can work together and must work together to be able to sustain conservation of living temples in places like Tamil Nadu. So when we came up with this, project proposal, a pilot project for restoration of the 12th century temple in Kumbakonam was the intent, and therefore we laid out a basic framework with which this can be taken up. It was not until 2019 that we could actually pick this up as an example, do the paperwork that was necessary to bring it to the table for discussion and have a system in place to be able to address it over the next few months. And it was in early 2020 that all the paperwork fell in place, and it was as luck may have it, it was Shivaratri in February 2020 that the MOU to carry out this study, the initial part, preparation of the detailed project report and estimates and so on, the memorandum of understanding between our institution, IIT Madras, the temple, the Thukkachi temple, and in fact, the Thukkachi temple is administered by the Thiruvellarai temple. So the MOU was between IIT Madras, Thiruvellarai temple on behalf of the Thukkachi temple and the Commissioner's office at HRNC. A tripartite MOU was signed to take this up in a systematic manner. And the items that you see here is what we had laid out as what should be the path to be able to academically, in a multi-stakeholder environment, understand what's necessary for restoration of such living temples, respecting both traditional and the modern approaches. And I was talking about February 2020, and that's when all hell broke loose. The world entered the pandemic phase, and a few weeks after the signing of the MOU, even before we could mobilize at the site, the lockdowns were in place. And we were quite shocked and surprised that this sort of an outcome, this sort of a situation almost blocked what we had intended to undertake. But it was a blessing in disguise, because a few months after the initial lockdowns, by July, August, we were able to mobilize small teams, go down to the site and work in an environment where nobody is disturbing you, because lockdowns were still in place, movement was restricted, and nobody was crowding places. And therefore, it gave us a lot of time to focus on this temple, to bring in different experts. And I'll speak to you about that in a moment. Bring multiple experts, do the necessary work, and submit the detailed project report. Of course, in a delayed manner, because we were meant to start off in February 2020, but we were actually able to begin only about 6 to 7 months after the signing of the MOU itself. So moving forward, I would just like to take you through different stages of this project and how the multidisciplinary studies were carried out and how they were intertwined and how finally everything fell into place in a way to take the conservation work forward. So a little bit about the history of this temple. It is, for those of you who have visited, a marvelous site sitting in the midst of a beautiful natural setting, the tributary of the Kaveri close to the temple, and in a region that is spotted with temples from the Chola period. So Sri Abathsahayeswarar Temple in Thukkachi village is a Shiva shrine constructed during Rajendra Chola I, period of Rajendra Chola I. talking of 11th century. It was later expanded by Kulothunga Chola and also by Vikrama Chola, which is all recorded. And based on the architectural characteristics, it is datable to the last phase of the Chola, third and the last phase of the Chola Empire. So you actually have, so what you see here, the picture here is a picture taken in 2024. So it was after restoration, but the site was nothing like this before. Any work could be carried out in this site. So overall layout, for those of you who have not seen this temple, you have a Rajagopuram, and the partially collapsed structure that you saw in the previous slides was actually the Rajagopuram. So you enter, you have the first prakaram, and as you enter, facing south, you have the Durga shrine and the Mahamandapam of the Durga temple. I hope you can see, I'm actually pointing to it on my screen. And then you have the Shiva shrine, the Abathsahayeswarar Shiva shrine, and the Mukhamandapa and the Mahamandapa in front of it, and the Parvati shrine as well, along with the Shiva shrine. You have cloister mandapas around the temple and all other facilities that you can think of within this second prakaram. So it's interesting, you have this outer prakaram and the Durga shrine, and then the first prakaram and the Shiva temple within. Moving forward, the Sthala Puranam talks about Thukkachi village, and talks about the tree being, I mean, the sacred tree being the Patri trees in this region, as a forest of Patri trees. Thukkachi village being a forest of Patri trees, and that's the sacred tree of this temple. There's also reference to Vikrama Chola suffering from vitiligo and being asked to drink from a well close to this place, and having recovered from the condition, promising to build a temple in honor of Shiva, and hence Abathsahayeswarar, the name. The name Thukkachi is again something very interesting. The village goes by the name Thukkachi, and Thukkachi is Durgai Achi, colloquially called Thukkachi. And Durgai Achi it really implies that the whole village went after the name of the deity in this temple, goddess Durga. So you see a picture here. This is from early 2020, and you can see the Rajagopuram. This is the smaller Gopuram. The Rajagopuram is even before. So that's the first and the second prakara. You can see the main Shiva shrine, the Parvati shrine, the cloister mandapas. You can see parts of the prakara wall have actually been dismantled because they've collapsed, and stones have been salvaged for the recovery. And the Durga shrine is even further within the site. So this was the status. You can see vegetation overgrown, collapses everywhere within the site. And this video here shows you a panorama of a 360-degree panorama of the site. You can see the Kaveri Delta, the greenery in this space, different structures here. The Mahamandapa of the Durga shrine. This is the Mahamandapa of the Durga shrine, behind which is the main structure, which was probably the most damaged part of the structure. You couldn't walk into this part of the temple because of beams and pillars in very precarious condition. Other parts, you can actually see different segments of this structure. In a moment, I will tell you how these photographs are actually, videos and photographs are actually feasible. A lot of collapse in different parts of the structure. You had roofs which had fallen, parts of roofs which had fallen. These are some visuals of the Vimana of the Durga shrine, completely covered in vegetation with structural damage. But a very beautiful structure, even though it's engulfed in vegetation. You could see that the forms were very unique and very beautiful forms as such. So this does give you a clear picture of what the state of the structure was. And it didn't get here in a few years. It actually got here in about 6 decades or more. So what we actually, soon after we started working at the site, what we actually realized is, given the condition of the site, it was not going to be correct and not going to be feasible for anybody engaging with documenting the site to be able to enter most of these spaces. Because of imminent collapse and because of the presence of even snakes and scorpions and bats infestation of a level that you can't imagine. And therefore, with our team, we worked out a means of documenting remotely using a drone and using digital photogrammetry as much as possible in locations where we could access. We accessed it with, we entered and took photographs and videos. But in regions where we couldn't because of the precarious condition, we resorted to drone-based surveys. And the reason why you see the ceiling not clearly visible is simply because it's not possible to make the drone go upside down and take a picture of the ceiling. And that's why that's masked off, and then we had to integrate different means by which such spaces could actually be videographed or photographed. Also, you need the GPS tracking to be able to move this drone around, and the moment the drone entered the Garbhagriha, contact with anything that you want, the satellite GPS tracking is lost and the drone doesn't know how to move. So there are challenges, and this was an interesting academic exercise for us, and we sort of thought through as to what can be done for remote rapid visual assessment, and RRVA that we're talking about is really related to that. Moving forward, here are some pictures of how we integrated digital photogrammetry and drone-based survey to document all surfaces of the structure. And instead of actually, we had from the previous works in 2012, the Sthapatis who were involved shared the CAD drawing of the site, and from which was only the site layout, the plan layout of the structure, and using that, measuring different parts of the structure and documenting elevation by elevation, making sections and different plans, we were able to document the entire site. And in the process, as I said, what was very important is there's a team of engineers and architects who are actually working, who've been trained in the modern engineering methods and architectural methods, not very familiar with the historical construction, parts of the historical construction, its proportions, and so on. And it was with close association with a Sthapati that we were able to understand the nomenclature, understand the meaning of each of these different parts of the structure, and hence every documentation, every drawing, plan, elevation, and section was provided with the traditional names of different areas of the structure, different parts of the structure, as you can see in these drawings. So that continues. You can see that these are basically photogrammetry based ortho photographs, ortho images. You can see a section here. So the plan is developed and then a section is taken, and what you see above is the section of the structure. So every structure, the main shrine, the Durga shrine, different elevations of the structure, the prakara walls, the cloister mandapa, each of these sites were completely documented. And this documentation was fundamental because this documentation had photographic quality of the actual condition, and therefore of high resolution, and therefore one could sit remotely and understand the the morphology of damage, the morphology of the condition of each of the construction materials and different parts of the structural system. So the same drawings were used for condition mapping. This was the Rajagopuram. Part of it had actually collapsed, and access was so difficult because it was just a mound of debris, and this was infested by snakes as well. So the access to this was impossible, and it was only when the work commenced that the Sthapatis and their team were able to start removing materials and moving the animals from this space. So again, a series of ortho images showing you the different parts of the structure. And this is what I meant, that the damage mapping could be done in a more systematic manner because we could work on high resolution ortho corrected images and identify the damage, create a damage map and identify different types of damages, which also helps because when you work on what are the repair techniques, what are the restoration methods that you have to use or conservation methods that you have to use, you need to know the areas for estimating how much work is required in each of these locations. So this is really a facilitating tool in that direction. So the damage maps for each structure is then carried out. Let me then talk briefly about the interdisciplinary approach that we adopted. You needed engineers, you needed architects who are trained in conservation. You needed inputs from all the people, the community, but you also needed to bring in other expertise, which of course at IIT Madras, being a civil engineering expertise that we are bringing in, we did not have. And therefore we brought in archaeologists to be able to study the site for us. And you do see some pictures of trial trenches that were done to understand the site better. And this is a lot of documentation that was developed, and I wouldn't be doing justice in a brief talk like this. But each of the experts who came in gave us so much of information that could actually be tied into the project itself. And I'm just quoting a few initial remarks or closing remarks of these experts. Evidence of Thukkachi village being in existence from the 9th century and 10th century. That the temple might have been built during the reign of Rajendra Chola. These are different aspects that actually emerged from each of these investigations. Interestingly, we could see that the site was subject to flooding, probably due to inundation from the rivers, and there was evidence of riverine pebbles in these sites, layers of these riverine pebbles from the archaeological excavations. A renowned epigraphist, Mr. Ramachandran, was brought in, and we procured the inscriptions which the Archaeological Survey of India's epigraphy branch had actually documented in 1917 and 1918. We procured those original copies of the inscriptions, and brought in someone like Mr. Ramachandran who could actually throw light on what these inscriptions are talking about. In fact, there are 10 inscriptions, and they're really from the Imperial Chola period, and they are mainly commercial, recording commercial activities, administrative activities, donations, and religious activities. And some make reference to this temple and this site in a nearby Chola temple again, whereas the stampages that you see here are from the temple itself. Example here of one during Rajaraja Chola III's reigning period, inscriptions related to administrative aspects of the site itself. We then had an Agama scholar come in and look at giving his perspective on the temple, and he was in his report, he talks about how this should have adhered to the Maguda Agama. And then we had several questions in terms of should we be restoring, what should we be restoring, and so on. And one of the aspects, for example, is we had this partially collapsed Rajagopuram, and it was clearly conveyed to us that if a section of a temple is damaged or destroyed to any natural catastrophe or invasions or animal destruction, that needs to be restored. And This sort of an input is what we were really requiring in being able to ensure that a consistent approach is adopted in planning the conservation strategy in the temple. We also brought in a social scientist. Swaminatha Shivacharya was the one, the Agama scholar who came in and gave us the inputs related to the agamic aspects of the site. We had a social scientist. We had a professor from IIT Jodhpur, Dr. Vidya Sarveshwaran, to give us insights on the socio-cultural aspects of the village and the temple. And given the fact that there has been a disconnect between the temple and the village for over 60 to 70 years, the temple has lost its standing in today's generation, place in today's generation. And to be able to understand the sentiments and to be able to revive the linkages, it was also important to bring in this conversation with a social scientist. We were very fortunate to have one of the retired joint commissioners from HR&C department who actually is from the Thukkachi village. He's 84 years old today, but lives in Chennai, retired and lives in Chennai, but hailing from Thukkachi, remembers how this temple was in its initial years and was really the most important source for us to first start working on the project. And second, for us to be able to understand the very deep linkage that the temple, which goes after the name of Durga Amman, has with this temple itself. What we did with the Stapati, again, an attempt to bridge the modern and the traditional knowledge systems, is we brought in a Stapati who helped us understand different physical segments of the structure. But we also did something else, which I think is essential for us to appreciate the traditional knowledge system with which these temples were built, and to be able to bring in those virtues as we are working on a conservation project and ensuring conservation of the site. So we really wanted to integrate this tangible and the intangible aspects of sacred spaces, trying to bridge the principles of traditional knowledge systems and those of modern conservation. This we achieved by trying to understand Ayadi Ganitam better with this temple as an example. So Ayadi Ganitam, to many of you, you may be familiar, you may actually know how it works, but it really is a means, is the way the temple's physical components are related in a very strong manner to the presiding deity and the primary stakeholders. The primary stakeholders during the construction of the temple being the patron, the builder, the Stapati, and the local community. And so trying to understand this traditional knowledge system that existed and was perfected and applied like a template across large parts of the country was something that we wanted to have a format to study. So what did we do? We adopted what we refer to as reverse engineering to calculate what might have been the Ayadi number in this ancient temple, Sri Abathsahayeswarar Temple. And then to understand how, with this technique that existed to proportion the construction, which was very strongly linked to the intangible aspects, can this inform the conservation process, especially when you're working with living temples or living cultural spaces? So we attempted this more to document the knowledge system than to be able to say that we've understood this now and we can take this forward. It was more of an inquiry to understand the system, and through that inquiry, ensure that we are preserving this intangible knowledge to an extent possible. So Ayadi Ganitam, it comes from Vastu Shastra, and traditional Stapatis use this for planning and construction of temples. Ayadi is typically with reference to temples. So a lot of astrological parameters are come into the picture. Directions of the Earth, directions of the site with respect to the planets, and these are used to determine one auspicious number associated with the temple that is being proposed to be built. So we're really talking of when the temple was conceived. And this number is a sacred number, a unique number, which is expected to maintain and ensure that the temple's spirituality and durability is kept. So it is, this Ayadi is nothing but a basic unit of dimensioning a temple. You need to know what is the plan layout, how large is the plan layout, what is the elevation of the temple. And therefore, this basic unit of dimensioning is what goes into determining how large the temple size is going to be, what is the size, what is the dimension, and how is it in plan, how is it in elevation, and even the decorative features follow the proportioning system that is actually coming from this Ayadi number. So it serves, if you want a definition, as a measurement for length, width, area, or perimeter of the structure, which is the temple here. It determines the sizes of rooms and all the elements calculated using the ratio and proportion method. So this is typically done after site inspection. So very much like today how we construct temples, Bhumi Pariksha is done, and then for the architectural design, which is Padavinyasam, Ayadi calculations are carried out. So the Ayadi formula, the basic number is taken, which is often is an odd number, and then you use that number, take multiples of that number, and divide it by 8. Now there are different prescriptions on how to deal with these numbers. The number that is then the remainder is what is used for the proportioning of the sites. And the remainder, you start with an odd number, and then you are processing that odd number. You arrive at a remainder. Remainders can be from 1 to 8, and each of these remainders in the traditional knowledge system is described with a certain quality. And if you were to have a system which works with a specific remainder, then the qualities of that space and the outcome as far as what is constructed can be affected by the quality of that number. So this was how the whole process went about. And here there is a linkage with the human proportions, the body of human proportions, and because you're constructing something where human beings are going to be engaging with. But it also had its basic unit coming from the size of the local grain as a measurement unit. And the quality of the grain, again, would classify the grain as an inferior grain, a medium grain, or a superior grain. And so this, along with the dimensioning coming from the grain, and using that dimensioning to understand human proportions, was a space within which these Sthapatis are working. So an angulam, for example, is about 3.5 centimeters in terms of what we know today. And an angulam is coming from the placement of these grains, 8 grains placed vertically, or 4 grains placed horizontally. Now, you know that the grain is locally procured, which means from region to region, these grain sizes differ, and therefore the measurement actually can be different from region to region. And that is the system that actually was followed. And so one has to be sensitive to understanding the differences will be there, and where do these differences come from. One has to try to inquire. So once the Ayadi number is identified for a given site, for a given project, then this Ayadi number becomes the perimeter of the sanctum sanctorum in the traditional units. So they would convert it to the number of angulams that are required. And it's really the outcomes that we saw in terms of those numbers, which sort of dictated what number to be chosen. So we did this exercise with the guidance of this Tapati, Sri Kumaraguru Baran Tapati, and our team of engineers sat with him and tried to understand the back calculation and arrived at a few possibilities. One was number 29, which would have been the IRD, or 31, or 729, or 731. You see, these are all odd numbers. And from this, again, one had to choose which would be the one that probably is the right IRD for this temple. And a little bit of a research on this then brings us to the fact that what might have been used in the conceptualization of this temple would have been number 29 as the IRD, and the Tanjai Muram, 29 Tanjai Murams would have been what was the IRD for this particular temple. And then there are repercussions of this temple, and there are good aspects, there are medium, fair aspects, there are bad aspects, and so on, which then lead you to understand in a sort of a qualitative or in a sort of metaphysical way that, okay, this was meant to last forever, or this could have had some issues. And you sort of start bridging the traditional approach and our today's modern approach, if you may. So this was a very interesting exercise by which the traditional knowledge system could be understood, and therefore by attempting to understand, I wouldn't say understood fully, attempting to understand, attempting to bridge the traditional knowledge and the modern approaches ensures that the intangible heritage is not lost. And I think every project of this scale, of this nature, dealing with a living cultural heritage site, a living temple here, should actually attempt that. Because without that, it's a very superficial approach of modern principles of conservation. And we really don't value what has gone into the construction of these sites. So two pictures here. These are before and after pictures, which give you a very stark contrast in how this original site was and today how this site is. And this is a bird's eye view after restoration, few days before the consecration itself. Again, a few pictures for you, which it seemed magical that the Stapatis, the workers, could actually deliver something like this from what it was. Forget all the study that was done, which was all, if you want, call it academic, results in a few pieces of reports and papers. But to be able to physically do this is mind-blowing. So you can see the Durga shrine before and the Durga shrine after restoration. These are photos just before the consecration. Similarly, a close-up of the Durga shrine before and after. You see a beautiful picture of the corbelling using brick in the interior before and after restoration. The Mahamandapam. So this was a constant conversation in terms of in situ conservation, that you need not tear down everything and reconstruct it. Although the Stapatis were saying, look, we know how to reconstruct it completely from scratch. Let us do it. We wanted to adopt a middle path. And really, the attempt was not to tear down everything. Some of these areas had to be reconstructed, dismantled and reconstructed, but we wanted to minimize that. And really, the only location that was actually dismantled and reconstructed, because the Mahamandapam had almost 40% collapsed, had to be reconstructed because the foundation had to be reset before reconstruction. So this is again before and after of the Mahamandapam. These are the cloister mandapas. In situ conservation was carried out in these in this location. And I just always feel like reflecting on this, that it was on around 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock on 28th November 2017, that as part of this expert committee that we were going from temple to temple and chanced upon this site that was in such a sorry state. And it was just divine intervention that I would say, that the right team came together, not saying for the study, I'm saying to be able to complete the restoration work, that in a matter of 6 years, it was possible to undo what the state the site was in for over 6 decades. So this is the East Rajagopuram, which was reconstructed, the collapsed portions after. And that picture is from the consecration day, teeming with people, teeming with the villagers reclaiming their Thukkachi temple. So this is again the picture on the day of consecration. It was 3rd September 2023, and you can see the Kumbhabhishekam happening. And I would like to read for a moment what the award of distinction UNESCO put into words something which was, I think, very valuable. They said, the revival of the Abathsahayeswarar Temple in Tamil Nadu has breathed new life into a once abandoned religious site, employing an interdisciplinary methodology which connects modern conservation science with traditional construction practices. In this spirit, engineering expertise and the know-how of Hindu temple builders, sthapatis, were applied in structural conservation and renewal of decorative works in keeping with the vernacular artisanal traditions. The pedagogical aspiration of the project in establishing guidelines for the restoration of historic living Hindu temples in Tamil Nadu is praiseworthy, and significant support from both the government and the devotees has enabled the continuity of this historic temple in a modern day devotional context. And I would not be doing justice at all if I don't mention the names of the entire team that made this possible. Of course, all of us were sitting here as part of the consultant team trying to put all this together, but it's credit to the department and credit to the individuals who came forward, the Tirunavakar Arakattale Trust, that actually helped realize this dream of restoring such a valuable Chola temple, especially the sthapatis, Shivagovinda Sthapati and Gurumurti Sthapati, and of course all the other different disciplines, the expertise from different disciplines that was received, and the team at IIT Madras itself. Let me just close by linking back to a project about which we had spoken many years ago in Mylapore at the THT, which is completion of an incomplete Gopuram, which is at Sri Pundarikaksha Perumal Temple in Thiruvellarai. And Tamil Nadu has this unique history, legacy of temples, the largest body of temples and the largest temple Gopura themselves. And this beautiful Rajagopuram is an incomplete Rajagopuram. It is clearly established that it was not completed. A study was undertaken, and I'm not going into the details because this was discussed earlier. But again, something that those of you who are interested should go and see, because after several years, almost a decade and more of efforts and studies has actually moved forward. The sthapatis working here have actually conceived how this can be completed, and the department had requested that engineering principles be used to verify the stability of the structure, the old part and the new. And again, I see a confluence of traditional knowledge systems and modern engineering and architecture. This was on the day of commencement of the construction of the rest of the Gopuram in 2018. But again, there was a gap because of the pandemic. And today, if you go to the temple, you can actually see that it is on the way to completion. And in a year or a year and a half, we all hope that what was left incomplete can be completed in this beautiful temple as well. With that, I have just exceeded the time slot given to me. I'll stop and take questions from the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. That was really a very, very enlightening and interesting lecture and full of information. I think it will take us quite some time to absorb all that you have told. Okay, Kishore Mahadevan will be asking you the audience questions from YouTube. But before that, I want to ask you a question, which is probably there in most of our minds. Like, apart from divine intervention and all that, how did you zero in on this particular temple as your pilot project? And did all your other stakeholders fall into line? Like,
yeah, I think things don't happen. Everything cannot be planned, and we're probably part of something
I
that
mean, were you
already
looking around for a pilot project and then chanced upon this, or?
So by by 2018, yes, that was when in November 2018, the expert committee had actually visited that site. By then, from 2014, we would have sat through proposals coming from about 250 to 300 temples, because the court had required that any conservation work in any of these temples must be brought to the committee, and then the committee examines it from all these perspectives and says whether it's urgent work and important work that needs to be done, or can it wait till the verdict in the case was completed. So having seen, as a group of committee members, multiple cases, we were in our mind wanting to arrive at one site that we could pick up as a learning experience for the temple. I mean, for the temples department, HRNC department, and for all stakeholders who are engaged. And this was absolutely chance. It was not on the itinerary as far as we were supposed to be going there. We went to Tirunageshwaram, we went to a few other temples. And then on the way, they said, let's go here as well, because you should see this marvelous temple. And it was something that really crushed our heart to see the state in which this temple was. And then it had to go in, right? And then it took us a year to act on it. And it's only
Yeah,
by
because, sorry to interrupt you, but as a pilot project, one might have looked for a slightly simpler renovation project. I mean, this is really
this is
mammoth,
no, but it really, if you see the number of temples that actually face the situation that we have seen here, you need to pick up a temple that's not too large, but brings in the complexities of such a temple. Because there are good sthapatis, there are good engineers, there are good archaeologists. You see good examples, but they are too far and few in between. And you needed to bring all this together in a very challenging site.
Okay.
And I think in that way, this was, we chanced upon this, and the pace at which even the donors came in and the whole system was able to take this up as an example that's where I say it. I think it's divine
Yeah,
intervention.
probably.
Yeah.
Over to you, Kishore.
Yeah, fascinating lecture, Arun. I'll start off with a few questions from our YouTube audience. Before the questions, there are quite a few people who have said, good job, amazing job. So a lot of good things and accolades coming through from our YouTube comments. Krishna Swami has asked a question. Are there any rules with respect to restoration of murals? Obviously, a lot of what you spoke about was around structures, but is there a parallel study or a branch of study that is attributable to the mural restoration?
Yeah, so I don't think I know enough to be able to answer that question. But in this temple, so what we try to do is in this temple, look at, there are some murals in this temple, but unfortunately, there's very little remaining from those murals. And so we didn't have a sufficient, enough instances of this mural to be preserved that we had to bring in a mural expert. So we really didn't attempt so much, but I'm not really sure if there is a very specific tenet on murals. There should be, because of the use of colors, and I wouldn't know more than that.
Sure. Talking about colors, there's a question from Watson. He would like to know why the Gopuram was painted with acrylic colors.
Yeah. So I think, let me clarify. That's not acrylic colors. I think we're very sensitive today that we shouldn't use acrylic paints. Okay, we're very clear, and I think enough sensitization has happened in the department as well, and all stakeholders. I mean, even architects, conservation architects working with this, archaeologists are very clear that, look, you shouldn't use any of these synthetic paints which affect the breathability of lime plasters. So these are not acrylic in the first place. These are water-based emulsions. And there is evidence of color having been used in the original construction. So when you say Panchavarnam, 5 basic colors being used to embellish these constructions. There is evidence of colors being used. There are some places where you don't find evidence of colors at all, and then you'll say go with Ekavarnam, just go with lime wash or just white, off-white type of a color. But in this case, there was evidence of colors being used. And today, you know, it's about creativity, and it's about these people who are trying to add, the embellishment to an existing space of lime stucco work. Today, with the kind of water-based emulsions and the colors that we have, we are not stopping with those 5 basic colors, but we tend to go beyond that. We tend to use an entire spectrum of colors. And I don't think we have evidence to say that only this must be used and others must not be used. And, we are in that sort of a space. It comes from a very natural instinct that they want to see it colorful. Okay. And we have tried to curb that in a way, saying don't put acrylic colors, don't put bright fluorescent colors. Let's try to stick to colors that are still pleasing to the eye, but colorful enough to capture the the brightness that you want to bring into the space. So it's a tough turf, but I think some basic rules are feasible, and it's definitely not acrylic.
Okay. Parvati has a question. Have the inscriptions been retained in the temple? You spoke about 10 inscriptions in your lecture. Have all the 10 inscriptions been retained in the temple, or did we have to lose any inscription?
I don't think 10 are in this temple. I think some are in another temple.
There are only 6 in this temple, and 4 or 5 are in a different temple. So the ones in this temple, many of them are on the temple structure itself, part of the temple's plinth. So those are recorded, and you can actually go see these. But there are, among the 10 which was recorded in 1917 and 1918, and the ones in this temple, not all of them are there, which was on free stones are not to be seen anymore. But I think it's about 1 or 2 that's not to be seen, if I don't recollect properly. But many of these are in the plinth, so that's there. And these have been exposed and cleaned up.
There's a question from Tamil Nadu. Has there been any record done for preventive maintenance works, or any proposal is disclosed? I know there is an overarching plan and a philosophy to the whole restoration, but I think the question is in the context of this temple.
Yes.
How much of that has been documented and formalized?
Yeah. So what's interesting is when you have very formal mechanisms of donations coming in, you have trusts that are very sensitive to this sort of maintenance and upkeep of temples. They bring in mechanisms, they ensure mechanisms are in place for systematic preventive maintenance of these temples. So in fact, the same trust that we're talking about, which was responsible for the restoration of the temples, has actually put in place staff dedicated to this site, and sensitized the temple staff and sensitized people around. In fact, what was very interesting is most of the labor required for the restoration work, stone and lime work, were from the village and trained by the experts of the trust, the Sthapati teams. So there was a very conscious engagement with the site, keeping in mind that in the future, are we ensuring continuity? Are we ensuring the means to for the upkeep of the temple? So for preventive maintenance, there is a mechanism to take care of it that has been created,
right,
for this temple. Yeah.
The question from Malati Chandramohan is, what happened to those ancient paintings on the ceiling as well as on the walls of the outer mandala?
There is very little evidence left of that. These are on the stone that the paintings are. We've definitely ensured that these are not, washed, or forget sandblasting. Even washing with water jet was minimized. And of course, done in locations where they could be water jet washing was done where required. But there are locations where there is some evidence of paints, but it's you actually can get confused because there are some paintings from the 18th and 19th centuries as well. decorations that were done at some point in time. So you see some fresh work, but then if you examine certain locations, you'll see some remains of some old paintings. We've not been able to bring in, we found it difficult at that stage to bring in a murals expert and do that, tie that in at that point, because also the extent was not sufficient enough to go down that line. So maybe that's something we can still take up in the current phase. Whatever is remaining, we try to salvage. It's not even documented fully, I would say.
Right, right. On similar lines, just like the paintings, there is a question on the idols and sculptures. V.K. Srinivasan said that when he visited the site about 6 years ago, there were a few sculptures that were strewn around the place, some of them inside a protected place. Would you know what has happened post-restoration?
No, the protected place, see, I think in 2012, there was an effort through the HRNC to restore this temple. Okay, so they did a Balalayam, and right as you enter the temple, there was this tin shed structure that was created where all the idols were placed and the worship was happening there. There were fallen elements around the site. And see, so restoration work had started in 2012. So they had dismantled. If you see those pictures where you can see stone systematically removed from the Prakara wall and placed.
Yeah.
So those were the things that are lying around. Some were sculpted, some were not. But the idols were in the Balalayam. And then those are the idols which have gone back into the main shrine after the Kumbhabhishekam.
Right, right. So what you said is actually coming up in a next question. Ramki asks, when the restoration was done, how much of the brick structure had to be, how much of the restoration had to be done on top of the existing brick structure versus how much had to be removed and then reconstructed? Yeah.
So see, when we work with such constructions, there are brick structures, there are stone structures. And what's fantastic is with the stone structures, you can carefully dismantle stone by stone. The lime is there, but the lime is really not a binder. The lime is more material that is creating a level. It's for leveling than for binding lime. And so stone, it is easy to dismantle, number, and ensure that you put it back. In case you have a broken stone, you either mend the stone, or if it's a weathered stone, you replace the stone. So when you're working with stone constructions, and this structure has a lot of stone construction, it's easy. But when you work with the upper floors of the Gopuram, or the upper floors of the Vimana, you work with the Vimana on top of the Garbhagriha, they are in brick. Okay. And the moment you think of dismantling the brick, then it's over, because it's no more the historical construction. And therefore, our insistence, and in this case it was feasible, that the Vimana and the Gopura only undergo in situ conservation. The damage was not so much that they had to be dismantled. Although the Sthapatis said, given this massive restoration that is happening, let us reconstruct the damaged Vimana or the damaged Gopura. But we could avoid that. And that negotiation, we had to find the middle path. And that actually happened, that in situ brick stitching, wherever cracks are, you introduce new bricks and stitch the old bricks, do grouting, and then do pointing. And so in situ conservation was done for the Durga Amman Vimana, and in situ conservation was done for all the brick portions, the different nele of the Gopura, and only in the Rajagopuram, the collapsed part of the Rajagopuram was constructed with freshly sourced brick and lime.
Right. So the Rajagopuram portion is the former, which is where the brick structure had to give way to a more stone-based structure, whereas in the other parts of the temple, like the Durga Amman Mandapam,
the Rajagopuram also, the lower story, the Kalkaram is in stone, no issues with that. In the different nele, this is the 7-tiered Rajagopuram. So the different nele are in brick. And I think about 5 nele had to be reconstructed. And the reconstruction was in brick, using new brick and new lime of the same sizes as the original construction. Whereas rest of the site, wherever brick structures were, they were conserved in situ only.
Yeah. There is another question from Ramki, where he asks, have there been newer idols that had to be placed along with this restoration work? Or have we largely stayed has it been the original Chola sculptures that are still
Yes.
around in the temple?
Yes. So the Agama scholar was there, who and since the Balalayam was there and the worship was happening in this temple, so the Balalayam was an active Balalayam. We visited this temple every morning. The worship would happen there. From the Balalayam, everything has just gone back to the. So I don't think there was any necessity for a new. There was no necessity for a new shrine and no necessity for new idols to come in this particular temple. Yeah.
Vijay Raghavan would like to know. I know you touched upon this, but I think he would like to know what is the most challenging part in the whole structural conservation. Right? I know you spoke about having to maintain a balance between the spiritual sentiments and the architectural one. Right? But what part of that project give you the biggest challenge in terms of
In
the
fact,
structural
I also
conservation?
just wanted to add to that. As a modern engineer, were you really challenged to work with this Ayati Ganitam and incorporate it totally into the design?
There's so much that we don't know. There's so much that we don't know. So, to even want to have a decent conversation with these tapatis, you feel totally inadequate first. And so it's taken some time for us to even pick up the basic language and pick up the basic means by which measurements and processes are carried out to build these constructions. And so it's taken time. We've had the Stapati that I was mentioning, Stapati Kumaraguru Baran, is the Stapati who came to speak about the Thiruvellarai Rajagopuram, has over about tens of lectures talked about the traditional building construction process. And these are recorded and available on YouTube. They are in Tamil. And on the NPTEL website, many of you may be knowing about NPTEL, which is National Platform for Technology Enhanced Learning. You go on to NPTEL, IIT Madras, or the IIT system, you will find special lectures, and this is under a special topic, Dravidian Temple Architecture. And the Stapati has given a series of lectures which are recorded. So it's taken a lot of time for us to even understand their language and understand the process. Now, in terms of the main challenge, see, I think with the heavy engineering that we can do today and fast construction, and we want everything to be done so fast, right? We tend to feel that it's easier to replace things, it's easier to reconstruct, it's easier to polish everything, make it all look good. And when finally devotees come back, pilgrims come back, you want to say so much of money has been spent, it doesn't shine, right? So we tend to be very heavy in terms of how we want to intervene in these places. And to say, okay, now apply brakes, you don't need to do that. And when you say you don't need to do that, then some departments, engineers would throw up a safety angle and they'll say what is there is unsafe. And so what do you do? So then you'll have to demonstrate that it is safe and then say, okay, now since it's safe and you cannot remove the whole thing, can we work with what is existing and replenish what is missing or replace what is damaged? That the value of this is also in what exists there, what the original. So can we salvage as much as the original as possible? Because it is not just brick and mortar, it is actually sentiments of so many people has actually gone in. It's intangible more than tangible, right? So that is the most challenging part, that it's easier to pull it down and reconstruct it. Definitely. But it's not easy to stitch it together, do new and old together in a way that you can still distinguish the new and the old. But in being able to distinguish the new and the old, someone can say, you've done that well. It doesn't look like an eyesore, but we know it might not have been easy. So I think that is the most challenging thing. That is the most challenging.
Varun Ramesh has a question. He says, is there an estimated life increase of the temple through this restoration process? Is there any such thing at all? Are we saying that through this process, the temple is covered for, I don't know, 50, 100, whatever number of years, or is there anything at all?
It's very difficult to quantify that, See, interestingly, let's take the Tower of Pisa. Okay, the Tower of Pisa was leaning with a tilt of 5.5 degrees and was so much out of plumb. And there was heavy engineering intervention that was done in 2001, between 2001 and 2011 or 12, over 10 years. And then they corrected the tilt to from 5.5 degrees to about 4.5, 4.2 degrees or something, which meant, which is very interesting because they said the tower was leaning with a tilt of 4.2 degrees about 200 years ago. So we've actually recovered 200 years of life, at least of this monument, and taken it to a state it was in 1700 or something. So, there was a way of quantifying how much back in time you might have been able to go, meaning you have given it an additional so many years of life. But in cases that, for example, this particular structure, these have been around for 800 years. And if you maintain them properly, there is no reason to believe that these will suddenly fall, cease to exist. So it's very challenging to put a number there. But the rider is, unless you do have a maintenance protocol in place, it's like the human body. You go do a surgery and then you can't ask the doctor, how many years am I going to live? The doctor will say, if you do this and do this and do this and you're strict, you will live long enough. It's like that.
No, but did you additionally try to at least structurally reinforce it? Like, because, for example, all the seismic design and all is there now, which may not have been there then.
So we'd have to look at it, quantitatively. We are in a region where earthquakes do not govern the structural design. It's in a low earthquake prone zone, and these structures are robust enough. What we really need to do is you need to refurbish the structural fabric. So, you do repointing, which is the mortar is refurbished. When you have voids, you try to fill that with lime grout. So that's the only strengthening that is happening actually, which is almost restoring it to what it might have been when it was constructed. In some cases, especially earthquake prone zones, you mentioned Myanmar when you were introducing me, there are locations which are affected by very heavy earthquake action. And we really see that after every major earthquake, everything just falls down. And question is, today when you're restoring those sites, can we just put them back like they were? Or do we reinforce them even more? And the simple answer is, no, you have to have some engineering intervention to reinforce it even more. So it has to be in response to what the risks are at a given site.
Give us a sense of the magnitude of this project. You spoke about an Agama scholar, an epigraphist, social scientist, of course, several engineers, 3D scanning and all that.
Archaeologists.
Archaeologists, of course. How many people were working through this restoration projects? Are we talking about few hundreds, few thousands? What are we talking about?
So during the pandemic period is when we were working at the site in documenting it, in studying the site. And we are talking of not more than 10 people there at a time. Different experts would come at different stages. We were also trying to minimize, number of people gathering at a time. It was even vaccination stage. So it was all small teams that were operating. But so I would say a total of about 20 people would have worked in the documentation phase, in that preparation of the detailed project report. And once it was, given back to the department and the donors were identified, the donors ensured that there were 2 full-time sthapatis who brought their teams, one working on stone and one working on brick and lime. And, there wasn't a single day that the work stopped. Once it began in 2022 till it completed on 3rd September, consecrated on 3rd September 2023. So when the work was actually underway, you would have had hundreds of people on the site. But in the study phase, it was still longer period, but a smaller number of people working at it.
Why do we have, you mentioned several Ayadi numbers. Why do we have multiple Ayadi numbers for a shrine?
Because we are trying to figure out what might have been the number that they used as the auspicious number to do the entire proportioning. And there are multiple possibilities here, because these are all proportions. You can take one of these numbers. So what we want to do is we want to find out what might have been that the number, which is used to proportion the dimension, the side dimension of the Garbhagriha. Okay. You can have multiple numbers there. Multiple odd numbers can multiplied with something can give you that dimension. There must have been some basis for it. So we are going back to those calculations that these ancient texts ask you to do to arrive at the Ayadi number. So what typically happened in the past is they would choose the number and then dimension the Garbhagriha and then the rest of the structure. We are measuring the Garbhagriha and then following this process and trying to match what is probably the closest number. So it's a very fascinating exercise, and we can go wrong completely. But then, you sort of justify one or the other and see which is probably closer. But what's fascinating is such an intricate system existed, an intricate quantitative system existed. And it dictated the construction of such marvelous, complicated structures. And that's beautiful. And they tied in sculpture and structure so beautifully.
And the decorations, proportions, everything.
Yeah. So it's not just brick and mortar, you also got to do sculpture on it. So you can't go wrong. Your dimensions then go wrong. So this is just mind-blowing.
Amazing.
So it was not just re-engineering, it was a little bit of reverse engineering as well.
Yeah,
that's why I called it reverse engineering. We call that process reverse engineering.
Yeah.
Reverse engineering.
Right.
Yeah. Kishore, I wanted to ask a general question. See, you said that earlier on they had these mishaps, accidents, or whatever you call in terms of restoring, where you painted over the murals or, plastered buildings, etc. And then you got the technical committee to come into HR and CE. So have these incidents greatly reduced?
I think there is more sensitization today. We are talking of such large numbers. We are blessed with such a huge country and so many instances, so many people working. I think there is a general consensus on what are the minimum things that shouldn't be done, right? And I think we are seeing reduced instances of these happening, definitely. These blunders are coming down. But I think there's a renewed interest in restoring more and more temples, and there's more and more interest in the public to come forward. And so, because of the sheer number of people coming in and sheer volume of money that is involved, because they're big, getting granite, getting lime done, getting these tapati, the volume of the project costs are not small. The
Because we
risks are higher.
repeatedly see the styling inside the temple is granite, and that seems to be kind of parallelly going on,
Yes. So see, the fundamental thing is, even in the past, it was always about somebody coming and donating and wanting their name to be associated with the construction of a temple or enlargement of a temple or a certain embellishment and so on. So this putting a tablet and putting your name there is something that has been in the psyche for over 1,000 years, right? So that's continuing even today. And someone who's coming to revive the temple's physical infrastructure would like to see their name on it. So they're happy to say, tile it, put my name there, put a board there, and so on. So now we're working with them, working with the government to say that, look, you put in guidelines and say these things cannot be done. Let there be a board outside before you enter the historical space saying that such and such restoration was done by funds from such and such person. That, we are not very fond of rules in this country. So it's not easy to, get that across and get it established uniformly.
Yeah, in fact, if I make sure, just one more thing. You said that there is an inherent conflict between so-called archaeological idea of restoration versus the fact that there is increased footfall, so need for more infrastructure. How is this handled internationally? You don't see this kind of indiscriminate constructions coming up in international monuments. They also, I'm sure, have increased footfall and things, but it's only in India that you repeatedly see these structures coming up. I mean, everywhere, covered arcades and mandapas and this and that, saying that the pilgrims' comfort demands this. So I was just wondering how is this handled across the world, especially in Europe?
Yeah. No, in archaeological sites, it's simple. If it's a site which is an archaeological site, you need to preserve it. There's no compromise. It will just be preserved. It will just be as is conservation, as we refer to it. So if some work has to be done, it'll look similar to what it was originally, original materials and everything. But if it is a living site, definitely there is infrastructure that is put in place. For example, when the Catholic Church was going into the second millennium, St. Peter's was expected to receive millions of people over the entire year. And they had created such large infrastructure to cater to the public that was expected to be coming over the entire year. And everything that was put in place within the precinct of the historical monument was temporary and removable. Okay, so there it's really sensitivity at multiple levels of the.
Looks like we.
I lost connection, I think.
Yeah,
probably
that's
it was
okay.
me.
Yeah,
It is sensitivity at multiple levels of the administrators, of the professionals who are involved, and an understanding from the public that, look, you have to strike a balance. You can't expect 5-star amenities when you go to some of these sites, because it's not okay. So I think it's sensitization and education. Simple as that.
You sure you have any more questions?
Yeah, there are a few more questions. I know we are running short of time. We are reaching there, but there is one interesting question from Sridhar Padmanabhan. If you were to rebuild this temple from scratch, would you do anything different, or what would you do differently?
This is very difficult. This is very difficult. No, so this is very interesting question, because it's not a fictitious question. We are actually doing it, right? We are actually doing it. The Ram Mandir was built today. Ram Mandir was built a few years ago. And in fact, it's the Sompuras who have designed the whole thing. But engineers came in. L&T was very strongly involved in the foundation engineering. And question is, would you do anything differently? What we were faced with there was traditional methods have to be used, traditional materials have to be used, no steel anywhere. So you deal with it. But since we are living in a modern engineering world, the engineers actually executing the structure, the foundation, and all the engineered constructions had to design the structure such that they can last for at least 1,000 years. So and therefore some engineering had to go into what should be the composition of the concrete that the structure is sitting on. And as far as the superstructure is concerned, we know that it is a earthquake prone zone. So calculations, we checked whether these will survive earthquake of a larger return period. And since we found that there are issues with the original design, we had to request the Sompuras to iterate the design, introduce additional walls, because finally somebody who's executing is signing somewhere saying that this will last for 1,000 years. So there is a professional obligation, which, because of the quantitative approach that we adopt today in modern engineering, necessitated some changes, but still within the framework of no use of iron, pure material, stone and lime and so on. That's the only different thing that possibly we would do. I mean, I'm not able to relate to this site and say, will you rebuild? No, I don't think we might be able to, or we should. But there are instances of new constructions which are temples that are being built, and they're being built different from how they were built in the past.
In terms of proportions, they seem to have gone totally very different.
Bigger and larger. Yeah, everything is big today. So
this has been very enriching.
Yeah.
So much to learn today, as enriching as the lecture where we met you at THD several years ago when there was a lecture by Sthapati on the Thiruvellarai. So Thank you so much, and I'll turn it back to Gauri.
Yeah. It's also a moment which
Thank you.
makes us intensely proud. As modern professionals, you feel that you can understand what was visualized and what was the intent behind it, conserve it to the best possible extent. As you correctly said, while it's very easy to quickly take a decision to break or dismantle and do again, that so much of effort has gone into understanding both the science and the intent and the art of that period and retain it as much as possible. It makes you very proud to think that as modern professionals, you're able to do this. We feel very, very proud. Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Just before concluding, I want to tell our audience that one second, that our Thukkachi is just 2 weeks away. And this is just a reminder to all of you. Once again, kindly mark your calendars and please be there. This year it is titled Daiva Tamil, Nayanmars and Arvars, and it is at our usual venue, Tamil Virtual Academy, Koturpuram, on 20th and 21st. And for all those who can't make it in person, of course, live streaming and YouTube links will be available. And once again, we have people who are fairly well known in the public forums, speakers like Doshin Sridhar, Sudha Sheshian, Madhusudanan Kalaichervan, Nellai Chokkur, Shankar Narayanan, etc. And a few speakers who are not so popular in the public forums, but equally scholarly, like N.S. Ranganathan, MP Srinivasan, Rajni Arjun Shankar, T.S. Krishnan, etc. We have 2 dance dramas, 8 talks, and 2 interactions spread across 2 days. And we hope to see all of you there. And a very goodbye from all of you, goodbye from us, and wishing you all a great weekend. And we, of course, hope to see you in next month in New Year in an entirely new format in our January 2026 monthly term. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you. Hope to see you here at our Heritage Center soon.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.